Hi, Damien. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Rance. Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too. I really enjoyed your the where you spoke at that conference, that online
Oh,
conference.
thank
Thank you
you.
so much for sharing that video. I was like, oh my gosh, he's talking about action lists. This is great.
Cool. No, it's cool, but it's also the little. Unfortunately, I didn't put it in the same link. But there's also a nice animation, kind of sketch note style video animation of the talk, which is about 6 minutes long, which is also on my LinkedIn thing, which is quite sweet. And I didn't do it; it's somebody way more talented at drawing than me did it for me. But that's quite nice as well. It's a kind of Reader's Digest version of the talk in 6 minutes.
Yes, I did watch it. That was really cool.
Mm.
And hello, Emily. It's nice to see you. I think you're on mute.
Oops.
There you go.
Can you hear me? Thanks for
Yes.
having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, and Janet is with us as well. Hello, Janet.
Hi there.
Hi. Well, while more people are coming on, I'm going to share just the promo video of this roundtable because it kind of explains the purpose of this roundtable for those of you who this is your first time coming. So let me share that with you. Here we go. Hello, story designers. Since the publishing of my first book, Instructional Story Design, in 2020, it's been a pleasure hearing from so many of you and how story design is transforming your training. Nice. But let's face it, sometimes you hit roadblocks and need some help pressing through. A storytelling community, people that understand your challenges, that encourage you to keep going, and share solutions that can help you overcome those roadblocks. That's what I'm talking about. This is what the Instructional Story Design Roundtable is all about. So bring your questions, your expertise, your stories. We'll talk as a group and in breakout rooms with a global community of story designers who are transforming the training experience. Whether you're a seasoned designer or new to the industry, register for the roundtable and connect with story design. I can't wait to see you there. And here you are. I'm so glad to have you here. So that is kind of in a nutshell. So if you go to needastory.com and you go to train with stories, there's a place on the homepage that says train with stories. You will see on that kind of instructional designer page, a place to register for the next roundtable coming up. And you'll also see on that roundtable page just some resources for you, including at the bottom recordings of the last roundtable that we had. And then, of course, the recording of this one will also be available to you at the bottom of the page. So this is an effort for me, like since this book came out in April of 2020, a momentous time in all of our lives. I've wanted to reach out to the instructional design community and just hear from you, like, how are you applying this? How is it helping you? And what are the problems? What problems are you facing? And as I did that, the thing that came to the forefront for this session was technical training. I do technical training and I do not know how to design for technical training for stories, right? How do stories and technical training work together? Can you even do that? So we're going to explore that today together. I'm going to ask for your expertise, and I'm also going to share some strategies with you that indeed you can master and put stories in your technical training. So before we get started on the technical training part, I just want to make sure that everybody is on the same page with story design in general. So I'm going to put a link in the chat. If you have not read Instructional Story Design, you can get it there. I just put it in the chat. And I encourage you, it's like a comprehensive, from analysis to delivery, everything that you would need to know to fit the story design process into your already existing instructional design process. It's not a separate process, it's kind of baked in. And this is the process. You're welcome, Emily. Let me share with you the model. This is at the heart of it all. And I think Damien could actually teach this to us because he basically taught it at this conference that he went to, which thrilled me to death. We want to connect the story to the action we want people to take as a result of training. That story has to be really concretely connected to that action we want people to take. So what are the elements of a story? You can just tell us, you can type it in the chat.
Emotion.
Emotion. Oh my goodness, aren't we afraid of that in corporate America? Yeah, there's some emotion involved.
Characters.
Characters, yes, characters.
Yeah.
Conflict.
Yeah. Conflict. Got to have that conflict. Exactly. Anything else come to mind when you think of stories, elements of a story?
Engagement.
Yeah, like, so that's kind of like the result of the story, right? Because of the story, I'm engaged in it. So you guys have really pointed out some key characteristics of a story. And I'm sorry, Katie Ryan, that you had a difficulty getting into this meeting. Maybe later you can tell me why, if something went wrong with Eventbrite or something. Anyways, the two elements that I focus on and I think are most important for a story for training are you've already mentioned it, characters, but I use the word relatable characters because it's important that the audience have some empathy for that character. Can't just be a random character, right? It's got to be tied to that that audience. And that is why for every new audience that I train, that I consult for, that I design a story for, I create an audience profile. And I encourage you to do the same. Just create, and this will be good for your instruction. It'll also be good for your stories, because from that audience profile, you can really create some characters that are going to resonate with them. The other story element that we must have, and I'm so glad that somebody said it on the line here, conflict. You have to have conflict. And I use the word strong conflict to emphasize two things. Number one, you got to have it. Number two, it needs to be as strong as possible. Because I forget who said emotions, but the conflict is that source of emotional input. And we need that emotional input. And when you put these two relatable characters into strong conflict, and that conflict, and we're going to talk a lot about this today, that conflict comes from your action list. You may call it a task list, you may call it learning objectives, you may call it performance objectives, whatever you call it. I call it an action list, my team calls it an action list. We all, my stakeholders call it an action list, because I want everybody to remember that we're training people to do things. Observable actions. And when you put relatable characters into strong conflict with those observable actions, you create something wonderful inside the learner. So Katie Ryan, you create audience profiles too, but often battle clients wanting to make the audience for everyone. Do you have some tips for helping? Oh, okay, cool. So let's talk about audience profiles. So yes, you might have a very wide net that you're casting right here when you're doing an audience profile. It might be for everybody in the entire enterprise, a very large group. So how do you create an audience profile for those people? So start with where everybody is, right? What are their current circumstances at work? Generally, what are their current circumstances, and generally, how are they reacting to those circumstances? So I can think of a company that I worked for. when there was a major change in the organization, and everybody was feeling the pressures of that change. Everybody was a little bit wondering if their job was going to go away. You know, so there are some overarching outside pressures that everybody in the company is likely feeling. If you're training a more specific group, then you can narrow it down even more and even more and even more. And sometimes you don't have access to that audience, right? There's like, I don't even know. I don't know their manager. I don't know them, right? So, I mean, there's got to be somebody. You've got to like talk with somebody who is familiar with that audience. The other solution is Google them. And I know that sounds a little like stalking, but I did this course for a group of board of directors, right? And there's no way I could get anywhere close to them, right? And legal was like, me. They're not telling me anything I want to know about these people. So I Googled every single one of them. And I just created from those individuals this more collective audience profile to kind of like get a sense, okay, these are who these people are. This is kind of the level of education they have. They're pretty well respected in their fields and so forth. So I hope that gives you some helpful tips there, Katie. But what happens when we put these relatable characters into strong conflict is that we get something happens inside the learner where all of a sudden they have a desire for resolution. And that's where they want to be. And that's where we want them to be too. Because once they have that desire for resolution, then they're open, they're ready, they're with you, they're 100% ready to go on this journey with you, on this training journey, which is the last thing, right? Because we still have this gap. That's where your training comes in. So your story should have relatable characters, strong conflict, which will produce a desire for resolution. And once that resolution has been sparked, don't resolve it for them, right? Let them sit with it. Let them sit with that conflict. That's when the training comes in. And I'll show you a model that I use for training with stories in just a moment. And then boom, you've made that connection from the story to the action that you want them to take. And it all stems from what you're already doing in the analysis phase, from these two things, the audience profile and the action list. So if you're not creating an audience profile, so kudos to you, Katie Ryan, for doing that. And if you're not creating an action list, I mean, if you don't have an action list, you have no training. So you must be doing that already, right? So you have these two things available to you, and these are the raw materials that you're going to go to create stories. And often in technical training, it's very codified. One, you do this first, then you do this, then you do this, right? So that's good. That's good because it's all spelled out for you. And you know, you don't have to do a whole lot more digging. I am going to just stop there and just ask what kind of questions you have about the story design process, about audience profiles, action lists, any of that. Any insights? Any like, oh yeah. How many of you have already read the book? Have already, okay, awesome. Yay. That's on your to-do, Emily. You gotta do that. So Julie, you've read it. And Damien, you've read it. Awesome. And probably others of you that I can't see right now, but
Yeah, I also did that Beyond workshop you had a few months back for, I forget how many weeks it was. And that's how I was introduced to it.
that is why your name looks so familiar. Okay, so yeah, if you were on the storytelling tour, also we kind of went step by step through the entire process, just doing one little skill at a time. It was really fun, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I had so much fun doing that.
But it's so interesting how you can put your stories together using Beyond, and how I have a hard time putting that type of story together the way you do, like your introduction, or you're on a hot air balloon, or you were showing when you guys were at the cafe, different ways at the cafe. I don't know if I just need to get better at using Beyond, because I feel like I'm pretty confident in Beyond, but to flow the way you have it flow, I think is just amazing. And sometimes I'm like, I just want to take one of your stories, your Beyond videos, and then kind of manipulate it, right? Because
Thank you,
before you know
Julie.
it, you have like 30 scenes, and then you have where you have to have everything, and it's everything staggered down when enter effects, exit effects, camera
Mhm.
motions. It's very time consuming, but
Yeah,
yeah.
it is. It is. Thank you for that compliment, Julie. So Julie is referring to an online animation tool called Beyond, and that tool is really fantastic for creating stories. It's I don't know if you are. So it says I missed the so Wanjohi. Did I say that right? Wanjohi. It says kindly clarify on the action list. Personally, I am stuck at doing the conversations. It's on my reading list. Okay, good. I missed the Beyond series, just couldn't. Okay, cool. So I don't understand your question, Johi. If you could explain a little bit more about personally, I am stuck at doing the conversations. That would help me answer your question a little bit better.
Okay, thank you, Rance.
Sure.
So, gotten about how you put together the relatable characters and the strong conflict, but then what drives the story would be the talk between the characters. That's what I'm talking about, the challenge being developing the conversations. And I'm looking at it where you're looking at an imaginary case scenario. So you just, with the relatable characters, what I thought about doing is pick up profiles of people I think I'd want as characters, check some profiles on LinkedIn and build the character from that, right? But then now the conversation that drives the story, that's where the major challenge is.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. That makes total sense, and for cluing us in on your LinkedIn stalking. We'll be careful when you come to our profile. You might be doing a training about us. So, Wanjohi, I would say that writing conversationally is a skill. Yes, it is a skill. However, I think that everybody can master it, at least to a certain level. As you are, so what drives the conflict in the story is the action list. So you are thinking of your action list as this plot almost. So if you are supposed to, if it's a leadership course, and the first thing that you're supposed to do as a leader is warmly welcome the employee into your space. And then the second thing that you're supposed to do is set aside your work and give them your undivided attention. Just think about those two things. If the manager in the story is in conflict with those two things, you can imagine in your mind what's unfolding, can't you? If they're in conflict with warmly welcome the employee into their space, you can imagine what that interchange might be, yes? The manager might say, oh, hi, or sure, have a seat, and they're just kind of ignoring them a little bit. And then to put away their work and give them their undivided attention, if that's the second action that they're supposed to take when the employee sits down and sits across from them, or if it's a Zoom call even, then, if that was my directive and you're all my employees and I'm supposed to be giving you my undivided attention and I'm doing this, so you have this conflicting action happening in the scene and you can see it unfolding. And the conversation piece, think of it, I would say, approach it first as telling the story. Tell the story as a narrator, then go back and begin to add lines of dialogue for each person, especially the ones that are really emotionally packed and important. And then work your way up to pure dialogue where two people are going back and forth. and make the lines short, just like they would be in normal conversation. You know, stay away from adjectives and adverbs. We don't use those a whole lot when well, I just used whole lot, but we don't use them frequently in our conversation. Stay away from describing how people think, what people are saying. Strip those adverbs and adjectives out of your story, and then pare it down to the action. You know, because those conversations are happening as a result of what they're feeling inside, their conversation is actually an action, right? So if I say to you, oh, hi, my action is, you know, I am resisting you. I don't really want you to come close to me. So practice telling the story in that way, just describing the actions that are taking place without adjectives, and then translating that into some dialogue. And she said, oh, hi, welcome. You know, and then as you get more confident, then make that scene entirely dialogue. Does that help, Wanjohi?
Yes, it does. It does. Great insight for me.
Okay, good. Does anybody else have insights on how they create dialogue that you could share? How you've grown in that area, maybe?
I think one of the things is the relatable character. If they've got a bit of backstory to them, a bit of depth, because they're not doing whatever the action is because they're bad. You know, they're not an evil manager. That's why they're not welcoming them in. There's a rationale that's driving that behavior, and I think if you can kind of pin that down a bit, then it helps you to think, well, actually, they're not welcoming them because, you know, they've got a deadline, or they've got this thing happening. So then it kind of, then it's more natural. Well, okay, if I was working with a deadline and somebody came in, what would I say? Kind of flows out more naturally. Where if you just ended up with oh no, okay, this is a bad manager who's just going to be rude to their staff, that's quite hard to write, because you're just kind of writing a villain. Well, it's nice, easier to write one way actually, but it's not very naturalistic. You know, it's not very, it lacks the kind of reality.
Damien, that's a beautiful observation and well put. And again, that goes back to our audience profile. If we know what's going on in the workplace and we know what those outside pressures are, then they have a reason for doing the things that they're doing in conflict with the action list, exactly as you described, Damien. So in this case, it was a deadline. You know, if it was a reorg as well, and that manager was fearing their job and they were completely distracted by this, you know, this other thing going on, then yes, the conversation flows. You can imagine how that conversation would go then. Exactly. That was beautifully said.
I've never been very good at making up characters. I've always had to reference real people that I know and just mimic how they talk and how they respond in conversation, because I don't know if maybe I'm just crippled in that creativity part of my brain, but I need actual, even if it comes from a TV show, steal their persona, you know, mimic how they respond and have emotion, have expression. And you're right, people don't speak with a lot of adjectives and flowery words. People are straight to the point, and emotions fill in the blanks, you know, so that's been my go-to. I commend anyone who can make up characters on a fly.
So Emily, I think that what you're doing is just a wonderful practice. So I am also a playwright, and I remember writing a play for this group of girls who were in junior high, and most of them I lived in New York for quite a while, and most of the girls lived in inner city New York, and I'd been around them for a long time. And when I was writing this script, I was listening to them, right? Listening to and if you can get inside the heads of your learners like that, like what you're describing, that's exactly the kind of characters you want to write, because then you're getting inside of their heads. And when I presented the script to this group of girls, they were like, "You wrote this?" Like, yeah. And it just it just flowed right out of their mouths because it was exactly how they talked, you know, and then how they thought as well. Because I had gotten, you know, I gotten to know them so well. And so if you can get to know your learners that way and think about an actual person speaking, man, that's a great technique. And I would say really nobody can create a character out of thin air. I don't think there is a person like that. We are all, I mean, even Shakespeare stole, right? Even Shakespeare had to base it on real, you know, real human beings. Um, so yes, we can make up characteristics about people, but really all of those things are coming from our audience profile. So there's no thin air characters being created. So I'm so glad you shared that. You're doing a good thing. Okay, are there any other questions just about the story design process before we get into technical training in particular?
I do have another question if no one else does. So I like storytelling to do training, but you know, and inherently it's not short training bites, you know, or let me ask this: has anyone successfully done this type of training, building this type of training in short, palatable training bites? Because that's pretty much the modality most people want their content. They don't want anything long and drawn out. And, you know, I've done some trainings in the past where it was a story and it was in compliance, and it, you know, you're talking about 23 module. It just, I could tell those who were engaged and loved the story, and some of them were like, I don't have time for this, and totally bombed. And my second go round, I tried to keep with the storytelling, do this shorter modules. Then I found that in that method, they were losing the essence of the training. Like they didn't remember the objectives. They didn't remember, like they just, all they remembered was the story, which was lovely, but I guess I lost, I got too caught up in the story and keeping it consistent because it was shorter, and I lost my way with keeping up and making, you know, so I'm trying to bridge the gap, and I don't know how. Is anyone
it sounds like you're bringing up a great topic for a future roundtable as well, because this sounds like a micro learning type of topic where you know, discovering different ways to use stories within a micro learning type of program where it's lots of short little modules. So I would say, you know what, I'm going to share with you in just a moment kind of my method of storytelling, and we'll talk about micro learning when we get to that. Damien says, think about their motivation, why they are in conflict with the action. That will help with the dialogue. Yes, absolutely. And I have this little table within the book, and I've modified it a bit since then. But, you know, if you can think about the action you're putting your character in conflict with and give them a corresponding conflicting action, and then say why they're doing it, that makes them a person and not a villain. Katie Ryan agrees that microlearning would be a great future topic. So you know what? I think we might be onto something here. So for our next roundtable, we might be doing some microlearning. Okay, thank you so much for asking those questions. And we will get back to that in just a minute. Let's talk about technical training and stories. And I just want to define what I think about when I think about technical training. I think about safety training, and I think about just operational training. I think about training people how to use applications. So if there are some things beyond those, definitely want to hear, but I would like to hear from you. How have you tackled storytelling in technical training? Don't leave me, people. You got to have something to say about technical training. How many of you actually do technical training?
Yeah, I do.
Okay,
Yes, I do too.
Mohab, what is your
I'm
what is
working
your
as an
frustration?
instruction. Yeah, I'm working as an instruction design trainer. So sometimes I use the stories to explain some points in the process, maybe I share some stories about how we can deal with the subject matter expert, how we can deal with the client. So I usually use the stories in these sections, how we can to prove and to explain how we can communicate with the clients and the subject matter experts in our job.
Okay.
And I think it's very useful because it takes my students to the real life scenarios, and it helps them to improve their understanding and relate everything we discuss to the real life. That's all.
Okay, so
Thanks.
you're having some success with that. That's good. It looks like some others of you also do technical training. Amy Sue does. Amy Sue, what kind of technical training do you do? Or others? Utility billing systems. Now that is, man, I'm dying to take that course. You're all like, yeah, no.
So I work for a COVID testing company. We do saliva-based collections in mobile labs throughout the US. So I have to create training for the laboratory itself for the scientists and how not to mix reagents and antigens and all the different things in the vials together. I haven't gotten that far to create a story about it yet. I have used a Beyond for an introduction and some transitions, but it's not a story.
Okay. Thank you, Julie. So we have science, we have billing, new products offering that are highly engineered. Yep. Katie Ryan, maintenance department, how to troubleshoot, maintain, and repair the thing. Looking for guidance. Yep. Very good. Anybody else? Okay, Damien, my work with contact center agents, very system and procedure driven. Okay, awesome. So I approach storytelling with technical training regarding, so we got cannabis grow house processes. So you got agriculture too, cool. I approach technical training as I would, so if your leader comes to you and says, how much, what do you estimate the time to be on completing this course? In that moment in time, they are not looking for you to tell them a story, right? They want to know how long it's going to take you to develop that course. And there are instances in technical training when really all they need to do is know how to do it, right? Like, show me how to do it. And so you need to show them how to do it. If a story is needed, let me share my screen with you now. There are times though when stories are very beneficial to technical training. I'm going to share with you two scenarios, two strategies for technical training. The first is self-discover the action list. And this is the more traditional story design. I say traditional, I mean, I wrote the book in 2020. So it's the process that I describe in the book about helping the learner to discover the action list for themselves. So if it is, you've got these 1, 2, and 3, actions on your action list, and the learner is supposed to bop it and then twist it and then what is the other one? Bop it.
Pull it.
Pull it?
Pull it. Yes.
pull it.
Pull
Thank
it
you.
is the answer.
So if the order is bop it, twist it, pull it. And the character in your story is pulling, bopping, and twisting, you know, then it is on the learner then to be able to help discover for themselves what went wrong. They have to go in and they have to examine the procedure, where the procedure went wrong, and discover it for themselves, which is awesome. That's a great way to do it, especially if there's a lot of different ways for something to be done and they need to do it in this specific order and in this specific way. Self-discovery is a great way of helping them to remember, because they tried it this way. In the story, they tried it this way, and then they tried it another way and it didn't work, but they finally discovered the right way to do it for themselves. There's another purpose for another strategy for it, and that is kind of the downstream and kind of the hitting that motivation, that feeling of the consequences of doing things the wrong way. And that's valuable too, because that taps into their emotions and is going to help them. It's like putting them in a flight simulator when they watch the story. And when they leave that story, they're prepared to take action. They just need to be told the right way to take that action, right? But in this case, it would be like, I know somebody who was doing it was agriculture, and it was training for how to shut down this machine in a silo in the right way, and they did it the wrong way, and the silo blew up. So that's pretty major consequences, right? And if you told that story, boom, you know, I mean, that's a pretty, you know, that's a pretty severe consequence. And I'd want to know how to shut down the silo and not blow it up if I were taking that course. And then you go into the training piece. So those are the two strategies for using stories in technical training that I recommend. And this is the process of how I recommend building a story-based course. But let me pause because there are some chat things going on here. Let me check that. Okay. So Rika, I have worked on e-learning projects for training employees on equipment operations. We have used case scenarios with small storylines. That's nice. That's nice. And Rika, what are those case scenarios? Are these instances when maybe something went wrong in the process?
Hi, yeah, typically those are the kind of scenarios, because then you have the opportunity to tell them, you know, why you shouldn't be doing it a certain way, and you know, what you should be doing instead, or what's the importance of doing it the right way. Yeah. But yeah, small scenarios like there was one on operating a forklift machine, and and the precautions you had to take before, you know, engaging with the machinery and while using it. So, you know, these were not just given as a list of bullet items, or, you know, you have to take care of A, B, C, D, but there was a small storyline and a scenario that said, okay, so-and-so has to be doing this task, and ended up, you know, doing it this particular way. And, you know, there was someone who came in between, for example, and he did not notice, and there was an accident. So there is, like you mentioned, consequences are in there. So the entire learning on what needs to be done and what are the precautions to be taken were all communicated through that storyline.
Yes, nice. So in addition to showing those consequences, you're also showing those missteps. So that would kind of take us back over onto the left side, right? You're showing those missteps along the way, and that's excellent. And I would say, you know, with forklifts, to me, forklifts seem like the most harmless little thing. They're just like little things you putter around in a warehouse, and they look so fun. But I mean, I've heard so many horror stories about forklift accidents. I'm like, oh my goodness, forklifts are not cute anymore. Like, they're this really major accident waiting to happen. And if you are able to instill a little bit of that respect for the machinery by sharing a case study, man, go for it. And what you're really doing is you're sharing non-examples. And so instructional design, you know, we like to show a lot of examples, but showing non-examples really help us to define how to do it correctly. It further, it limits the options. And because you're sharing case studies, these things have actually happened.
Yeah.
So it's not like you're just making this up, right? It actually happens. Like you pushed lever 1 when you were supposed to push lever 2, and as a result, this person has a concussion, you know? So that's a great use. Those case studies are a great use. Anybody else use case studies? Okay. Well, let me share with you my recommendation for setting up your story-based training for success. Here's how it goes. Tell the story. That's number 1. Notice I don't start off with a list of performance objectives, right? In this training, you will learn how to da 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 da. No, I tell the story. Tell the story first. Then I ask them a reflection question. And often that reflection question has really no right answer. It's just tapping into the emotional part of the story. You know, after watching this guy become unconscious because of this forklift accident, you know, how do you feel about learning how to, or how do you feel about, you know, jumping onto a forklift now? You know, tapping into the emotional piece of the story and just giving them time to reflect on that, how they feel about the story. Secondly, give them something to solve. This is especially for the self-discovery side. Give them something to solve. We like to tell, then test. Tell, test. Tell, test. Right? Stories help us to reverse that and give them the situation, right? Show the story, then give them a chance to solve it, right? Really critically think about what just happened, what might have gone wrong, and give them a chance to solve for that. And then offer them feedback. And so I would encourage you, let them wrestle with it a bit, right? If you're using job aids, oh my goodness, I have to tell you this story. I was talking with somebody 2 days ago, and they are consulting this company, their talent development area. And he was talking with one of the operational people, and the operational managers were like, "We hate the training. We hate the training." So he was like, let me take a look at this training. And so he watched one of their courses. It was an hour. And so Emily, you've been creating some long courses, right? So this one was an hour about safety training, about how to lift heavy objects. Okay. At this point, I'm like, dude, just like follow what the poster says, you know. You don't really need a training on that, do you? He's like, exactly. They've got a job aid on the wall. So he watched the course, and you know what the first 3-minute video was all about? The 3 areas of the spine. Oh my goodness. Like, we need to know that to be able to lift a heavy box, right? Hey, put that box down. Name the 3 areas of the spine for me, please. Nope. You're gonna go back and take training before you lift that box. Of course not. Of course not. There's a lot of extra in these courses, right? So yeah, use the job aids that are available on the job. If it can be done with a job aid, just like do the job aid. You know, post it somewhere visible, post it online, whatever, wherever they are interacting with that material, post it there. If it's, you know, software training, then, you know, if you can, you know, partner with a group like WhatFix, which is, you know, helps to integrate applications, and they can like put in little tutorials, with as you're going through the application. Awesome. I'll come back to applications in just a minute, but let them use the job aid to solve the problem. Just let them use the job aid. Yeah, they're going to have to do that on the job anyway. So give them something to solve. Here's your job aid. Here's a link to click the job. Click this link. You'll get to the job aid. Use that job aid to solve this question. And then give them feedback on how they answer. They might not get it right. That's okay. This is training. So give them then the feedback on how to do it correctly, or say, hey, use the job aid and try again. So highly recommend job aids. I wanted to talk just a minute about applications, software training and applications. What would trip your trigger as a learner? Would you like to go to a course that it was called using pivot tables in Excel? Or would you be more attracted to a course, Marlo has to complete a financial report by the end of the day using Excel? I would say, if you're doing application training, find those tasks that are most common in the workplace and put the character in the situation where they're having to complete that task. And then you can put that character in conflict with the action list. So if you're creating something though, and it's infinitely more motivating to take an Excel class where I know that I am creating a financial report and I've got to create a financial report. So I would say kind of build your applications training around tasks that people actually have to do. And that will help you write your story. And that will also just help the learner to engage with that. All right. I wanted to, Emily, get back to your question about microlearning. But before I do that, let me stop and see if there are questions about technical training and these two strategies, or comments or insights or anything you want to share. Anyone? Anyone? Euler? Okay, then I'll talk about microlearning for just a second. Emily, what you see on the bottom of the screen here, story, reflect, solve, feedback. So you could imagine this as an overarching story, because stories are very efficient, right? So if you've got 10 modules, 10 microlearning modules, but you have one story, and that story is the first module. And there's all these conflicts within that first module that contain, there are 9 conflicts, essential conflicts, because you've got 9 items on your action list. And you're going to tackle each one of those actions in one of the following 9 modules. So you see the story, you see the whole story, right? And you see those actions in conflict. Then your next 9 modules are reflect, solve, feedback. Module 2, reflect, solve, feedback. Module 3, reflect, solve, feedback. Referring back to the story that they saw in module 1 as the reference point, and just giving them that opportunity to remember the story, remember why this is so important, remember what could happen, and then give them something to solve, and then give them feedback. That's one strategy for microlearning. Another strategy is doing kind of what you're already doing, which is the story is embedded in each one of the modules, and each action has its own. That might be, that kind of overarching story might be a good solution, because it can cover so much ground. Stories can cover so much ground, especially if those topics are very related to one another. You're just breaking it up into smaller actions. That might be, what do you think about that?
So I like the idea. So I'm going to give you a real life training that I created, and I feel like it failed. So I used a contact center. It was a certain department. I chose certain employees to write into the training, and each of them were tackling one of the compliance issues, one of the action lists, which I thought was a great idea because there were so many action list items. So I used a contact center for people, and it got very complicated because I was in real life, we have all these issues happening all at the same time. So I thought I could duplicate that in the training. But it got lost in the sauce completely. But like on paper, it looked ideal because these are like, it was a case story pretty much. There were real life incidents that were happening. There were a billion do not call list type compliance things that needed to be adhered to, but they were all happening wrong all at the same time, all in the same department. So I just mimicked that in the training, but I got caught up in the story and lost the importance of not violating these do not call protocols. So so I guess I like your idea with the first method where you're starting the story in the first module, going to your second module and pointing out those important action items, providing those feedback, and then moving on. You know, I guess tackling each issue individually.
Yeah. So the story itself presents the mess, presents it all at one time,
Right.
and then each module kind of untangles that mess one at a time. But I think reflecting real life is always a good idea, especially the complexities of it and the ambiguity. So I love that. I love that idea. So I want to I think you might have hit upon something, and that maybe we need to talk about microlearning at our next roundtable in more detail. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, so Amy Sue says the nice part about doing it as modules is if rules change, you only have to change one module, not the whole training. Good. Damien, as a creative person, it's easy to get too involved in the story. Yeah, you always want to make sure that, I mean, this is for a purpose, right? It's to train people to do things. Good. Michelle, it sounds as though there is a need to be able to move between big picture and detail. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And the story can present that big picture in all its ugliness and messiness, and then you can go into detail. Okay, let's piece this apart. There's so much going on here. Excellent.
Yeah, I feel like you know, it's one of those situations where it's so easy to get lost in the story and telling the story about it. But really remembering the purpose of the learning is to teach a point. And we need to, you know, come back and say, okay, so here's the story, but, you know, remember character XYZ and how they struggled with this. Like, you know, the point you need to learn about that is, you know, and so we have to move between that teacher and the story, and remember the story serves the purpose rather than the purpose serving the story.
Yes, exactly. That's very well said. And I think too that, I mean, I had a student once who created this story for training, and you know, I think she kind of got stuck on strong conflict because by the end somebody was dead on the floor, and I'm like, probably don't want to kill off your characters. That has you've already resolved everything now. I mean, the person's dead. So yeah, the story can't take over. It can only support, right? It can only it can be the centerpiece. It can be the centerpiece of your training, but it is the centerpiece of training. So I appreciate your transparency there, Emily. I think that brought up a great point.
This really helped me. I think I needed to talk it out, and you added some very good points, and I know exactly how to do it next time.
Woohoo! Oh, that's so good to hear. I want to share with you guys, you may know about this or you may not, but I am starting an online school and super excited, of course, to start that. It's coming probably in May, but there is a link in the chat. Oh, it didn't come out as a link, did it? Let me try that again. Well, you might have to copy and paste neetastory.com /online school in there. And leading up to that, I'm going to be giving some free courses to people who subscribe to the website, and you'll kind of stay in touch with me, and I'll be able to tell you, hey, this is how far we are on our school. But one of the first courses is going to be an instructional story design course. And it's different than the book in that you're actually going to be creating a story and a training piece. And you'll be getting feedback from coaches, and I'll be appearing live at least 3 times throughout. But a lot of it is self-paced. It's pretty intense, pretty thorough. I'm excited to get that going. The next thing is January 27th is where I have kind of penciled in the next roundtable. And now that I know that we are kind of leaning towards mobile, or not mobile, micro learning, that might be the topic of our next time together. This is a link to that roundtable event so that you can register now. If I do change the date, I'll let you know. But that's where I've scheduled it for now. And then the survey is basically 2 questions. Is there something about the roundtable itself that you would like to see improved? And what do you want to talk about next time? And those 2 links are in the chat too. Well, I've enjoyed our time together, and I hope that you continue to keep writing stories. Emily, I'm really impressed that you're writing stories, and you haven't used the book to do it. So you must have a knack for this thing. Julie, it's great to see you. Janet, Katie, Ryan, Michelle, Amy Sue, Wanjohi, thank you for your question. Rika, Damien, man, keep spreading the joy, man. And Moheb, I'm so glad that you came as well today. Do you have any closing questions that you'd like to ask, or insights from this session that you'd like to share with the group?
Thank you for this interesting session. Thank you, Rance.
Yeah, and it's nice to have the opportunity to actually sit with you one-on-one and be able to pick your brain, even though we haven't picked that much, but we definitely do learn a lot from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And Julie, anytime you have like a question about Beyond that you're like, how do I do this? Just ping me. All right, guys, y'all have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.